Book 1, The Mix-Up Time. Chapter 1. On Saturday, October 22, 1977, University Police Chief John Kleberg placed the area of Ohio State University's medical school under heavy police security. Armed officers patrolled the campus in the cruisers and en route, and armed observers watched from rooftops. Women were warned not to walk alone and to be cautious of men when entering their cars. For the second time in 8 days, a young woman had been kidnapped from the campus at gunpoint between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. The first was a 25-year-old optometry student, the second, a 24-year-old nurse. Each had been driven into the countryside, raped, made to cash checks, and then robbed. The newspapers published police photographic composites, and the public responded with hundreds of phone calls, names, and descriptions, all worthless. There were no significant leads and no suspects. Tension in the university community mounted. Pressure on Chief Kleber grew more intense as student organizations and community groups demanded the capture of the man Ohio newspapers and TV broadcasters had begun to refer to as the campus rapist. Kleberg put Elliot Boxerbaum, the young investigation supervisor, in charge of the manhunt. A self-styled liberal Boxerbaum had become involved in police work while attending OSU following the student disturbances that closed the campus down in 1970. After his graduation that year, he was offered a job in the university police department if he would cut his long hair and shave off his mustache. He cut his hair, but he balked shaving his mustache. They hired him anyway. As Boxerbaum and Kleberg examined the photographic composites and the data provided by the two victims, everything seemed to point to a single assailant. A white American male between 23 and 27, weighing between 175 and 185 pounds, with brown or reddish-brown hair. Both times the man had worn a brown jogging top, jeans, and white sneakers. Carrie Dry, the first victim, remembered that the rapist wore gloves and carried a small revolver. Occasionally, his eyes drifted from side to side, the symptom of an eye condition she recognized as nystagmus. He had handcuffed her to the inside door of her car and drove her to a desolate country area where he raped her. After the rape, he told her, "If you go to the police, don't give them my description. If I see anything in the newspaper, I'll send someone after you." As if to prove he meant business, he took names from her address book. Donna West, a short, plump nurse, said her assailant carried an automatic pistol. There was something on his hands, not dirt or grease, but an oily stain of some kind. At one point he had said his name was Phil. He cursed a lot. He wore brown-tinted sunglasses, and she never saw his eyes. He took the names of relatives and warned her that if she identified him, she or someone in her family would be harmed by a brotherhood that would carry out his threats. She and the police assumed he was talking about being a part of a terrorist organization or the mafia. Kleberg and Boxerbaum were confused by only one significant difference in the two descriptions. The first man was described as having a full, neatly trimmed mustache. The second was described as having a 3-day growth of beard but no mustache. Boxerbaum smiled. "I guess between the first time and the second he shaved it off." At the Central Police Station in downtown Columbus, Detective Nicky Miller, assigned to the Sexual Assault Squad, checked in for the second shift at 3 o'clock. Wednesday, October 26. She had just returned from a 2-week vacation in Las Vegas, feeling and looking refreshed, her tan complementing her brown eyes and the feather-cut sandy hair. Detective Graham Leach of the first shift told her he was transporting a young rape victim to University Hospital. Since it would be Miller's case, Graham Leach gave her the few details he had. Polly Newton, a 21-year-old student at Ohio State, had been abducted behind her apartment near the university campus at about 8 o'clock that morning. After she parked her boyfriend's blue Corvette, she was forced back inside and told to drive out to an isolated area in the countryside where she was raped. Her assailant then made her drive back to Columbus to cash 2 checks before having her drive him back to the campus area. Then he suggested that she cash another check, stop payment, and keep the money herself. Because Nicky Miller had been on vacation, she hadn't read of the university campus rapist or seen the composites. Detectives on the first shift filled her in on the details. The facts of this case, Miller noted in her report, are similar to those of 2 rape abductions being handled by the Ohio State University Police that occurred in their jurisdiction. Nikki Miller and her partner, Officer A.J. Bessel, drove to University Hospital to interview Polly Newton, an auburn-haired girl. The man who abducted her, Polly said, had told her that he was a member of the Weathermen, but that he also had another identity as a businessman, and drove a Maserati. After Polly was treated at the hospital, she agreed to accompany Miller and Bessel to search for the place she'd been forced to drive to, but it was getting dark and she was becoming confused. She agreed to try again the following morning. The crime scene search unit dusted her car for fingerprints. They found 3 partial prints with sufficient rich detail to be used for comparison with any future suspects. Miller and Bessel drove Polly back to the detective bureau to work with the department artist at making a composite drawing. Then Miller asked Polly to look through photographs of white male sex offenders. She studied 3 trays of mugshots, 100 to a tray, with no success. At 10 that evening, exhausted after 7 hours with the police, she stopped. At 10:15 the next morning, detectives of the assault squad morning shifted picked up Polly Newton and drove her to Delaware County. In the daylight, she was able to lead them to the scene of the rape, where they found 9mm bullet casings near the edge of the pond. That, she told one of the detectives, was where the man had fired his gun at some beer bottles he had tossed into the water. When they returned to headquarters, Nikki Miller had just arrived on duty. She sat Polly in a small room directly opposite the receptionist's desk and brought in another tray of mugshots. She left Polly alone and shut the door. A few minutes later, Elliot Boxerbaum arrived at the detective bureau with Donna West, the nurse who had been the second victim. He wanted her to go through the mugshots, too. He and Chief Kleberg had decided to keep the optometry student in reserve for a line-up identification in case the mugshot evidence didn't hold up in court. Nikki Miller sat Donna West at a table in the corridor alongside the filling cabinets and brought her 3 trays of mugshots. "My God," she said, "are there that many sex offenders walking the streets?" Boxerbaum and Miller waited nearby as Donna studied face after face. Looking angry and frustrated, she flipped through the photographs. She saw a face she recognized. Not the man who raped her, but a former classmate. Someone she'd seen on the street just the other day. She picked at the back and saw he'd been arrested for indecent exposure. "Christ," she mumbled, "you never know." Halfway through the tray, Donna hesitated at a picture of a handsome yoss with mutton-chop whiskers and dull, staring eyes. She jumped up, nearly knocking the chair over. "That's him! That's him! I'm positive!" Miller had her sign her name on the back of the photograph, then got the ID number, checked it against the record and wrote down William S. Milligan. It was an old mugshot. She then slipped the identified photograph 3/4 of the way back in a tray Polly Newton had not yet looked through. She, Boxerbaum, a detective named Brush, and Police Bessel went into the room to join Polly. Nikki Miller felt Polly must have known they were waiting for her to pick out one of the photographs in that tray. Polly fingered the cards, flipping them carefully, and when she reached the halfway point, Miller found herself growing tense. If Polly picked out the same mugshot, they had the campus rapist. Polly stopped at Milligan's picture, then went past it. Miller felt the tension in her own shoulders and arms. Then Polly turned the photos back and looked again at the young man with the mutton-chop whiskers. "Boy, that sure looks like him," she said, "but I can't say for sure." Boxerbaum was hesitant about filing for a warrant for Milligan's arrest. Even though Donna West had made a positive identification, it bothered him that the picture was 3 years old. He wanted to wait for the fingerprint check. Detective Brush took Milligan's ID down to the first-floor Bureau of Criminal Identification to match his fingerprints against the ones lifted from Polly's car. Nikki Miller was annoyed at the delay. She felt they had a good start on the man, and she wanted to go after him. But since her victim Polly Newton hadn't made a positive identification, She had no alternative but to wait. 2 hours later, the report came up. The prints of the right index finger lifted from the outside glass of the Corvette's passenger door, and the right ring finger and right palm were Milligan's. All fair value prints. A 10-point match, enough to take to court. Boxerbaum and Kliberg still hesitated. They wanted to be absolutely sure before going after a suspect and asked that an expert be called in to evaluate the prints. Since Milligan's prints matched those lifted from her victim's car, Nikki Miller decided to go ahead and file for kidnapping, robbery, and rape. She would get a warrant for his arrest, bring him in, and then Polly would be able to look at him in a lineup. Boxerbaum checked with his chief Kliberg, who insisted the university police should wait for the expert. Shouldn't take more than another hour or two. Better to be certain. It was 8 that evening when she, outside the expert, agreed that the prints were Milligan's. The Boxerbaum said, "Okay, I'll file for kidnapping. That's the only crime actually committed on campus, our jurisdiction. The rape happened somewhere else." He checked out the information that had come in from the Bureau of Criminal Identification. William Stanley Milligan, a 22-year-old ex-convict, had been payrolled 6 months earlier from Ohio's Lebanon Correctional Institution. His last known address was 933 Spring Street, Lancaster, Ohio. Miller called for SWAT team, and they assembled in the assault squad office to plan the approach. They had to find out how many people were in the apartment with Milligan. 2 of the rape victims had reported him saying he was a terrorist and a hitman, and he had fired a gun in Polly's presence. They had to assume he was armed and dangerous. Officer Craig of the SWAT team suggested a gimmick approach. He would use a dummy Domino's pizza box, pretending someone from that address had ordered it, and when Milligan opened the door, Craig would try to look inside. They agreed to the plan. But ever since the address had come through, Boxerbaum had been puzzled. Why would an ex-convict come 45 miles all the way from Lancaster to Columbus 3 times within 2 weeks to commit rape? Something wasn't right. As they were about to leave, he picked up the phone, dialed 411, and asked if there was a new fisting on a William Milligan. He listened for a moment and then jotted down the address. He's moved to 5673 Old Livingston Avenue in Reynoldsburg. Boxerbaum announced, 10 minutes away by car, on the east side. Now that makes more sense. Everyone looked relieved.